Hi, friends, and welcome to All the Things TV with me, Tiffany Jo Baker, where our heart is to help you grip God's grace, use your gifts, and get your goals, even in your mess and mission. Join us now for this episode of Season 2 of the podcast, where we talk about different areas that we may be on the struggle bus, so you can struggle less and succeed more and do all the things you've been called and created to do. Hello, y'all, and welcome back to All the Things TV with Tiffany Jo Baker. I am excited to be here again with you. And today we're going to be talking about a struggle that is really near and dear to my heart. If you know me or know a little bit about my story, you know that I have been a 3-time surrogate and have had the pleasure of carrying 5 babies for 3 families dealing with infertility. Along that road of surrogacy, I did have a transfer with an early pregnancy loss. And it adds a different dimension and complexity when that pregnancy loss is a baby you're carrying for somebody else. And so today we're going to talk about the pregnancy loss struggle. And it is probably more prevalent than you know it to be. Statistics say that 1 in 4 pregnancies end in loss. That's a big number. That's a lot of families, a lot of women and men that are grieving differently, and dealing with this journey of parenthood that ended up being different than they expected it to be. Well, I couldn't think of anybody better to bring on to talk about this than my friend Rachel Lewis. She is an amazing person, has her own story of loss and parenthood, is the founder of Brave Mamas, an online support group, and an author who recently released her first book, Unexpecting, Real Talk on Pregnancy Loss. Rachel, thank you so much for coming here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I've been looking forward to this. I know we've been scheduling this for a while, and I think it's so fitting for us to be talking right now, today, and in this season. And I know you have your own story. So could you kind of briefly tell us about what brought you into this space?
Well, pregnancy has always been a little complicated for me. My first pregnancy was, I had a threatened miscarriage. It was a 50-50 chance of miscarrying. And we didn't end up miscarrying her. But at the end of the pregnancy, we had a life-threatening condition called HELLP syndrome. And again, we almost lost her. And so her whole life, I've sort of... I guess I've experienced her whole life as a, like, we almost missed this kind of thing. I had that perspective. Had I miscarried her at 8 weeks, I would have lost all of this lifetime with my daughter. And so when we got pregnant again, it was unplanned, but definitely not unwanted. And because I had sort of given up on the idea of having another biological child, I was very much attached right away and very committed to doing everything I could for this pregnancy and for this baby. And at 7.5 weeks, my tube tore, and we discovered that my pregnancy was ectopic, and I was rushed into an emergency surgery, and they were able to save my life, and they were able to save my fertility, but of course they were unable to save my baby. And so I lost Olivia Joy then. I named her. That's the name I gave her. And then 9 months later, when I was pregnant again, just around 8 weeks pregnant, I found out from the nurse that my HCG was dropping and that I would miscarry. This pregnancy loss was different than the first, just in nature, and I didn't know what to expect. And so I went to Barnes & Noble looking for a book that could sort of teach me how to prepare my body and my heart and my soul, and just sort of what I would need and what I could expect from the coming weeks of the loss. And I couldn't find anything that spoke to where I was. And like you said, that pregnancy loss is so common. There's 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in loss. So I was a bit baffled as to why there is, shelf after shelf of maternity books. And yet there's a whole quarter of these pregnancies that just are are not being seen, are not being addressed. And so I was like, I'm going to write that book. And so that is what Unexpecting, that's what Unexpecting is. That's the book that I set out to write. So after that loss, we experienced 3 more miscarriages, early miscarriages, and they were all unexplained. We still don't know why I was having difficulty carrying a baby. And that was over 5 years. We also adopted a daughter during that time. We fostered a son twice. So we have had him for a total of 3.5 years, and we've reunified him twice. And then we also had our rainbow baby. So anytime anybody asks me how many kids I have, I really have no idea how to answer. That's such a complicated question to ask.
That's so true. So if somebody, and thank you for sharing your story, and being here. We could talk, there's so many things we could hit on. Your story is complex. It has a lot of facets, but if somebody who's watching right now has recently found out that their loved one is dealing with a pregnancy loss, what could you say to them? Like, what could help somebody when they're in the middle of it? What could they do? What could they say? Because we want to say something, we want to do something, but sometimes people don't, because we just don't often know what to do or what to say.
There is a quote from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk that says, true social support is the issue of reciprocity, being truly heard, being seen, being held in someone else's mind, and feeling like having a visceral feeling of safety. And so when somebody is trying to support someone through loss, I would say take each one of those principles and then apply that to the situation and say, how can I see my friend who's going through this loss? And that's going to look like listening. That's going to look like asking questions. That's going to look like recognizing what they need. And when they post on Facebook, comment. If they post about their baby, comment and say, I see you. Or if they're talking, listen. So that's the hearing part of it. And the real benefit of listening is that you don't have to talk and you don't have to give an answer. I think a lot of times people put pressure on themselves to either fix the grief or fix the person. And this is an unfixable situation. And it's a situation in which you don't need to come up with an answer and you don't need to make their grief better. So, that's actually can take a lot of pressure off of you, and to realize that your job is simply there to listen and to reflect back to them what they are going through. And then holding someone in their mind, I would say holding also physically, hugs, handholds, those things communicate love and support. And then the visceral feeling of safety. Are you taking care of their physical needs so that their body can relax, can tamper down that trauma response a bit, and they can know that they have the safety to grieve because their meals are being taken care of, their children are being picked up from school, their pet is getting walked, their lawn is getting mowed. So I would say operate from your strengths. What are you good at? Take that. Ask how you can see, hear, hold, and create a visceral feeling of safety for that person. And then I would say also mind your own boundaries. You don't have to be everything to this person. You need to be one thing really well. And so self-care for yourself is really important. And if you need it, find support for yourself as you are supporting other people so you don't burn out.
That's so good. I love how you said, use what you're good at in the filter of those 3 things. And because so many times we want to be all the things to all the people, and that's not what we're created to do. But what are you gifted at? Like, are you a good brownie maker? Make brownies and take brownies over. If you're driving back and forth and you're able to do the pickup, do that. Like, use what you have, the gifts that God's given you already, and use it on their behalf.
Absolutely.
To help them. That's so good. One of the things that I know I've heard you talk about is that the measure of grief that somebody
Mm-hmm.
is feeling isn't on the scale of how far along the pregnancy
Mm-hmm.
loss went.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I know even being working with surrogates and intended parents, we get attached to the embryos.
Mm-hmm.
They're, a lot of us refer to them as M babies.
Mm-hmm.
Those are their babies,
Mm-hmm.
frozen or fresh. And so, um, early pregnancies loss, where maybe you can't even see the difference in your stomach, doesn't mean that it's less grievous for somebody. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So physiologically, when you lose a baby, the hormone shift is actually exactly the same whether you're 4 weeks pregnant or you're 40 weeks pregnant.
Mhm.
And so that can put you at the same risk for postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, that kind of thing. And so physiologically, there's not this definitive difference that we often say between early loss and later loss. There's a lot of crossover. I would also say, like you said, love does not grow by weeks, and so studies actually found that. There's this presupposition that the longer you're pregnant, the more attached you are, the harder you're going to grieve.
Right.
And studies could not actually verify that presupposition. What they found instead is that what impacted the amount of grief and the amount of loss is there infertility involved? Because that's an additional trauma, that's an additional major life loss. Um, is what is the relationship of the parent to that baby? Like you said, there's already that strong bond.
Mhm.
This is their baby, and that's a real valid bond. It's 100% valid, and
Mhm.
so that affects it. What kind of support system does the person have? Is there an amazing support system, or in the case of early loss, usually are
Mhm.
they being dismissed?
Mhm.
Are they asked to just get over it? Are they dealing with an ambiguous loss where they're really struggling to understand what exactly was
Mhm.
lost? Are they dealing with a disenfranchised loss where everyone around them is saying, it's not a big deal, this happens all the time?
Mhm.
But for that person, it's a huge deal. Like I
Huge.
said, if had I lost my daughter at 8 weeks
Mhm.
gestation, I would have lost all of those moments of her lifetime. She's 12 now.
Mhm.
I would have lost every single moment of that. When if she would have died
Mhm.
in miscarriage. And so it is a very valid, it is a very real loss.
Mhm.
And like I said, there's complicating factors that happen in early loss, such as the disenfranchisement and the ambiguity that later losses don't have to deal with quite as much. So, so yeah, very valid
Mhm.
loss, and physiologically, scientifically,
Mhm.
it's valid.
Yes, and I love how you give words to it, to the
Mm,
ambiguity of it, um, and the different things that people are experiencing at different times. It's very helpful for us to have that framework and that thought process and know, oh yeah, it is. I am in that place. Like, is it valid?
mhm.
And where am I at in that? And so your words are powerful in allowing people to um, give meaning to it and give some framework to it. Well, this is a big one. So I've worked with couples before going through infertility, coaching couples through decision making, things like that, and even through loss. And often the husband and the wife deal
Mm,
differently.
mhm,
And often there can become have frustration
mhm,
because one deals different than the other and
mhm.
it doesn't look the same. What have you found along those lines?
That is a very common scenario, and it's one that I experienced as well. And what I found in my research, that was actually one of the more challenging chapters to write in my book on a father's grief, but it was also really enlightening, and I wished I'd had that information.
Mm,
I think it would have saved me a lot of heartache. Um, what I discovered is that uh, men in particular face this societal expectation, Western society's expectation, to clarify, of manning up.
mm,
And so, what that looks like is keeping a stiff upper lip,
mhm,
not crying. They are
mhm.
supposed to have all of the answers right away. So I always like to think of this as like Jack Bauer. I don't know if you've watched 24,
Yes,
but like
yes,
he's like the ultimate man,
yes.
right? Um, he always has an answer. He doesn't have to rely on other people. He's self sufficient. So these kinds of values are placed on men all of their lives. These are taught from when they are babies all the way. So they have all of these years of saying, well, this is how I'm a man. And then baby loss happens. And suddenly they are faced with a situation that they cannot fix.
Mm,
They're faced with a situation in which they have to rely on other people.
mhm.
Um, Men typically, like studies found that one of like the more common responses was freeze. You know how we talk about
Mm.
fight,
Fight
fight.
or flight.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yep.
So freeze was the most common response to a
Mm,
sudden loss of
mhm.
this feeling of I don't know what to do,
Yeah.
and that is terrifying for men.
Mm,
Um, because that shows them that they're not, manning up. Meanwhile, we partners are like, why aren't you manning down? Why aren't you crying with me? Why aren't you going to
mhm.
a support group? um, and so they're faced with these conflicting values and these
Yeah.
conflicting expectations on how they're supposed to experience this loss. And so that's a really huge factor. And then
Mhm,
another factor is men and women um, tend, so this is a generalization,
mhm,
to have different needs and different styles
mhm.
in grief. And so that I have it in my book. And if you want more information, you could go to Grieving Beyond Gender is the
Mhm,
book. And it explains how there's this intuitive style of grief, and there's
mhm.
this oh goodness, I'm going to forget the name. But there's two different styles. It is on a
Mhm,
continuum, and men tend toward one, women
mhm.
tend toward the other. We all share a little bit of both, but we're somewhere on the continuum. But both styles are completely valid.
Mhm,
Instrumental. There we go.
mhm.
Instrumental and intuitive. Um, but society only focuses on the intuitive style of
Mm,
grief. So we are all conditioned to believe this is what grief looks like. Meanwhile, men tend toward the other style, and
mm.
it's as valid.
Yeah.
It works just as well. It accomplishes the same goal,
Mm,
but it's disenfranchised.
mm,
It's not addressed. It's not affirmed. It's not validated. And so, being able to have a conversation with your spouse, being able to understand what is my
mhm,
need that I need to address, what
mhm.
style do I have, what style does my partner
Yeah.
have, and can we create some sort of communication or some kind of code words so that we can
Mm,
clearly show and clearly communicate where we're at in our
mhm.
grief, and then start to accept instead of challenge, start to
Yeah.
accept where the other person is.
Yeah, that's so good. And at the end of the day, I think we wanna know that they are grieving, that it
Yeah.
was a deal, a
Mm-hmm.
big
Mm-hmm.
deal, that they're not alone in this loss. And, and so I love how you gives us a framework on what to do with that and some verbiage on how to on what it is and what it isn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I know I could talk to you for a long time on this, but I just want to end with one final question. I thought
Okay.
this is an important one. When a couple loses a pregnancy or loses a child, that parenting role
Mm-hmm.
can get a little fuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like I don't have a child at home. So do I stand when some at church when they say all the mothers stand on Mother's Day?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we come in those scenarios when somebody asks you, "Do you have a child?" So can you kind of talk to us a little bit about that on, how can they still be a mother and a father and
Mm-hmm.
still parent this child even though they no longer are able to hold them in their arms?
Well, I would say, like I told you earlier, that bond
Mm,
is real and valid, and that bond persists past death.
mm,
It is actually a, I guess, more recent theory of grief that is called continuing bonds. And
mm,
what it does is it says Freud's theory that you have to let go and move on,
mm,
which those are messages we've all heard, right? Is actually wrong. That's not how the human body works. That's not how human attachment works. Um, and so we actually get to continue our bonds past death. We get to continue our roles as parents. So even if our baby has died, we will always be their mother and their father, and that never changes. What does change is what it looks like. Like you said, we're not attending school functions. We're not going to a school play. We're not walking our child down the aisle. So, what can we do? One, we can affirm our role. So, yes, we can stand at church
mm,
and say, yes, I am a mother. And we can do what feels right for us. I don't think that there is one way that is the right way to parent. Just like in living children, there's not one perfect way to parent. So it's what feels right to you, what feels natural to you. Do you want to set up a place in your home just for your baby's things? Do you want to have an online memorial? Maybe you do something like I did, which was blog, as a part of as a part of my outlet of grief and helping other people see and validate my bond with my baby. Perhaps you want to create a legacy for your baby that might look like starting a foundation or volunteering in your community or giving baskets to other lost parents. And it might not even relate to loss at all. But you can start asking, what has my experience in loss taught me? What are some things that I wished I had that I could provide for somebody else? So these are the kinds of questions, and I have a list of them in the book, but those are the kinds of questions you can ask when you're thinking about a legacy and what that
mm,
could potentially look like. But I would just absolutely affirm how you want to parent
mm.
is the right way to parent. And it doesn't matter what other people say, it doesn't matter what they think. Um, you get to do this in the way that makes the most sense for you.
Mhm. That's good. Is there, as we wrap up, is there a verse in the Bible or is there a concept in the Bible that you have held on to?
Yes, the book of Job has been incredibly helpful to me, and I know that may sound cliche for those of you who are familiar with Job or familiar with the church, because we often repeat the verse, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken
Mm,
away, blessed be the name of the Lord. What we fail to often account for is that is in chapter 2. Chapters 1 and chapters 2 of the Bible, or of the book of Job. And the book of Job is actually 42 chapters, if I'm remembering correctly. And 38 of those chapters is simply Job and his friends wrestling with suffering in the context of faith. And it's not a book, those chapters aren't full of answers, or real answers. They're trying to give answers, but really it's just this back and forth of who is God and who am I and why did this happen? And in the end, Job actually accuses God of wrongdoing, which is what we all say he didn't do, right? Because he didn't do it in the first 2 chapters. Um, and at the very end of all that, rather than God, smiting him down or anything, which is what we always, I think we have this fear of telling God what we think and showing him our wrestling because we're afraid that we're going to sin. We're afraid that it's going to upset God. And yes, at the end, God is very direct toward Job. But what he does is he says, this is who I am and this is what I do. And so Job got a picture of God that he didn't have before he went through this stage of wrestling and before he accused God of wrongdoing. And so it's enough for him to say, I had heard of you before, but
mm,
it's the idea of now I know you. Now I've seen you. Now I understand. And so the harshest words that God had were for Job's friends, who were so full of answers in that stage of wrestling that they didn't have time to question.
Mm.
So I would say the book of Job shows me that God is literally holding space in the Bible. He's holding space for wrestling.
Mm.
And that gives me permission to wrestle with God and wrestle with my faith in light of suffering without that fear of hurting or offending God.
So good. So good. Well, if people are going through a pregnancy loss or having a complicated fertility journey, where can they find you and find out more about what you're doing?
Well, if they'd like more about the book, it's at unexpectingbook.com. And I also have some resources there as well for pregnancy and infant loss. My blog is theLewisNote.com. And you can find me on Facebook or Instagram. On Facebook, it's Rachel Lewis, speaker and author. And I also have my Brave Mamas group, like you said. That's a safe space for anyone, any woman who is grieving a child in any capacity, whether that is infertility or all the way through child loss. And that is also on Facebook.
Wonderful. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today and for taking a real look at and a real space for pregnancy loss and the struggle that comes with it. I so appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next time on All the Things TV with Tiffany Jo Baker. Well, friends, thank you for joining us today on All the Things TV video podcast. If you enjoyed our time together and are taking away a nugget that has inspired your soul and success, would you share this episode with a loved one who could use it too? And if you haven't already, take a moment to rate and review the podcast and help me spread soul care and dream care. Until next time, I'm Tiffany Jo Baker, a 3-time surrogate and strategizer who loves to help you birth your God-given dreams. Now go do all the things you've been called and created to do with the grace and gifts God has given you.